week of heavy fighting, it was clear that the forces in the south were in fact breaking through the unbreakable Gustav line. The time for a coordinated breakout from Anzio was here. May 23rd, 1944, the Anzio breakout begins. The days of the Sitzkrieg at Anzio are at an end, and the days of the beachhead itself nearly so.
The onset of summer in Italy was a welcome relief after a cold, rainy winter. Italy today is a tourist paradise, but we German tourists in 1944 saw only the flooded trenches outside Nettuno. It happened a long time ago, but my memories of one day in particular stayed with me. The really good times stick in the memory, along with the really bad ones. My most vivid memory of the war was a day in the summer of 1944. Our division, the 65th, had been fighting for weeks, and my 40-man platoon had been whittled down to a handful of survivors. Pichla and I made our way back to the supply trains. Pichla we naturally called the Professor, because he had a year of university before his call-up. I took him with me because he could talk for hours, taking my mind off of things. He never demanded answers or asked me to referee petty quarrels. I could turn my mind off and just listen. We were finally out of the trenches, but in the confused fighting near Velletri, we were separated from our supply train until one glorious day when they not only caught up to us, but our company cook served up a feast of captured British corned beef. It doesn't sound like much, but a warm meal was a luxury after 3 months of living in squalid defensive positions, and the fighting was far from over. Our understrength regiment was pulling back to the Alban Hills, unexpectedly leaving my platoon as the rear guard for an entire division. I had left my men clinging precariously to a hilltop overlooking Highway 7, built atop the ancient Appian Way connecting Rome with the heel of Italy. My grenadiers were good men whom I had genuine affection for. By May 1944, we were living in rags and bits of captured British gear. My first sergeant didn't understand why I asked for the shoes, but didn't push back either. We'd been through too much together for that. To fulfill our new mission, I needed communications equipment. Fresh bread was a staple, and no one dared complain about the method in which it was delivered. We had gotten used to bad food, supply problems, ammunition shortages, inclement weather, and rotten luck. I didn't know what to make of what I was shown next. It seemed so inconsequential compared to the usual burdens we carried in the field. Our mail had finally caught up to us, and to the first sergeant's amusement, 2 of the letters seemed to spell trouble. I was momentarily annoyed, but the significance of the handwriting was overcome by my fatigue, the necessity of getting Pichla and myself safely back to the troops, and the small bit of joy they would find in finally getting a hot meal. The shoes I wanted for Gefreiter Kurz, Erich to me, a hometown friend who would have preferred to stay home machining metal in his father's factory. The war landed Erich with us instead, and his clear head and unexcitable nature had helped keep the platoon together. The swamps around the Anziata had rotted his boots away, and I was so overjoyed at being able to help him that I gave little thought to what was inside the envelopes. The 4-kilometer journey from the company supply train back to the platoon was fraught with perils. Enemy aircraft owned the skies, and Allied artillery fired 10 shells to every one of ours. Movement by daylight was nerve-wracking, and with the front disintegrating, enemy ground units could have been anywhere. I had already started to take much bigger risks that day than I had in the weeks of fighting in the shallow gullies and stream beds north of Anzio, where we had fought the Allies to a standstill. Unlike our comrades in Russia, we Germans in Italy were not yet accustomed to retreating, but by late May, the 65th had been whittled down into a collection of small battle groups by superior enemy firepower. We were finally getting our first taste of headlong retreat. The distant sounds of battle told us the enemy's main effort was far to the east. It was easy to let our guard down and focus on licking our wounds. Hot food, new shoes, and the promise of pulling back to safer quarters blinded us to the basic reality that we weren't out of danger yet. The division's weaklings and cowards had deserted on the Sangro the winter before, or been destroyed at Anzio, fighting for landmarks whose utterly common names betrayed no sense of the blood spilled there by both sides. The Red House, the Windmill, the Gravel Road, the Viaduct. I knew I could trust my platoon, survivors each one, to put out sentries, sight the guns, dig in against artillery and camouflage us from aerial observation.
Kurz, ein Geschenk von Tommys.
Ich habe auch ein bisschen Post.
Oh, wunderbar.
Schmidt.
Ja. Oh, danke. Offen.
I didn't realize that they were all as tired and fed up as I was. They were a diverse bunch. Rhinelanders, Austrians, a Volga German, and myself from landowning Estonians. My platoon had come through weeks of Spartan living conditions and watched as dozens of comrades came in meekly and left us violently. I was foolish enough to think the novelty of a hot meal would have been something to celebrate and to bring them together. I handed the mail out without a second thought to what the first sergeant had tried to alert me to. The stress of leading them, of having them look to me every time the shooting started, was becoming too much to bear. I was taking any opportunity I could to distance myself from them, physically and emotionally. Our tiny platoon was out front of the rest of the company, which was arrayed further back, ready to counterattack at the first signal from me. Platoon outposts like this had served us well throughout the Anzio fighting, but rarely had we been so thin on the ground as we were that day. We were few and far too exposed without even having dug in. All of it was my fault. I foolishly thought that for once, the war could wait a few minutes for us. Knowing we would soon be making our way north, I felt relieved. It was selfish, perhaps, but knowing we could leave the burden of holding the front to others while we pulled back to safety, if only for a few days, was liberating. I should have paid more attention to what was going on, but I was exhausted and too happy to let myself believe we were already safe. Perhaps, following my lead, the men also let themselves think we were safer than we were. Little thoughts of home could be a bright spot in a succession of dark days, but by the same token, bad news in the post might change a man's behavior for the worst. News of infidelity or the loss of a loved one could and did drive a man to recklessness. Our comrade Schmidt, Schmitty to all, had kept his sense of humor throughout the fighting and usually lifted spirits. I never mistook his lightheartedness for a lack of seriousness, but I learned that day it was possible to take it much too far.
By the time of the Anzio fighting, I had been in uniform 4.5 years. When Hitler invaded Poland, I joined the local regiment in Canada. When they found I had been a school teacher, the army kept me at home as an instructor. I volunteered for the parachute troops in 1942, and then only made it as far as England before once again being sidetracked into instructing. I had read about the 1st Special Service Force in the newspapers in Canada, and when a call for reinforcements came out in early 1944, I jumped at the chance, even though it meant becoming part of the American Army. Just as we Canadians showed up, 400 men from 2 decimated Ranger battalions came to the force. We thought they were overrated. They thought we were amateurs, but it was mostly in jest. We came to respect each other's skills, and the 2 newcomers in my section, myself and a new friend named Ben, newly arrived from the Rangers, learned quickly we had to rely on each other to survive. The Forcemen had gotten used to living behind enemy lines at Anzio, up against the Hermann Göring division on a stalemated front for weeks. In late spring, the situation became fluid, and we could tell Jerry was finally breaking from pressure in the Leary Valley. Bets were made about who could be the first to get to Rome. If our commander, General Frederick, had anything to say about it, it was going to be him. His boss, Mark Clark, was happy to let him try. In the meantime, we still had our own little piece of the war to fight. Patrolling was our life at Anzio. There were fighting patrols, 20 or 30 men armed to the teeth, wandering no man's land looking for something to kill. Contact patrols, trying to figure out where our neighboring units were. Those were quiet ones and smaller, but you never knew when you'd bump into Jerry in the middle of the night. Recon patrols were like contact patrols, only instead of looking for friendlies, you wanted to find the bad guys. You didn't kill him because you didn't want Jerry to know that you knew where he was. That was our mission that day. A recce, or as the Yanks called it, a recon mission. We were on a short leash, me, the new replacement from Canada, and my partner Ben, fresh in from the Rangers. It may have been a short leash, but once we crossed that highway, we felt like we were on another world. I knew we had heavy weapons teams with Browning MGs and mortars covering us, but in my eagerness to contribute, I hadn't realized how far we had left them behind. Words can't describe my reaction to seeing the grenade land at Ben's feet. In hindsight, I was obviously pushing our luck. I wanted the force to know I belonged there with them, but all I had done was land us in an ambush by a well-disciplined enemy who knew enough to hold his fire. Seconds turned to hours as we waited for the grenade to explode. By some miracle of luck, it turned out to be a dud. Trapped on the wrong side of the highway without a radio, I knew we had to get out of there as quickly as possible. Just as I came to my senses, the firefight started.
It's hard to describe just how noisy a battle can get. It often seemed even more so by the sudden quiet that followed. At the time, I was too consumed by fatigue, by drink, by guilt, to register what was going on. I issued orders by instinct, knowing instantly that our few moments of inattention may have cost us. I still had no idea just how much.
We were supposed to stay on our side of the highway. The sound of Ben's rifle snapped me back to reality, and we tore out of there as fast as we could move.
My men, just as aware as I that we had faltered, let their own soldierly instincts kick in, moving quickly into an all-round defense, while I prayed the rest of our company counterattack on their own initiative.
Our weapons team on a hill far behind us opened up on the Germans they saw moving into firing positions above us. They didn't even realize we were there. We made it to dead ground at the bottom of the hill. I was relieved that Ben made it to safety with us. The training films didn't prepare me for what I saw next. He spit out blood and teeth into my hands as I bandaged him. I don't remember much after that.
No sooner had the engagement started than the enemy melted away back into the brush below our positions. A handful of mortar rounds fell around us, and then a sudden eerie calm descended. I hadn't even been able to fire an SOS flare before the shooting stopped.
Ja, Meldung. Wir haben feindliche Infanterie. Wir brauchen sofort Unterstützung.
The company commander was unapologetic about their lack of action.
Ja, was glaubst du, haben wir noch?
Nichts. Ja, wie immer.
After weeks of holding firm, we were finally on the run. Still, I was relieved to have apparently driven off an enemy probe.
Und zwar sofort!
The relief dissolved quickly as we took stock.
Wir verstellen. Sammelt eure Sachen. Wir müssen hier abhauen. Wo ist Pichler?
Regiment had ordered a further withdrawal. It was suddenly rette sich wer kann. Save yourself if you can.
Na und Jungs, heute bitte! Scheiße! Wir ziehen ab! Los! Wir brauchen ein Zelt.
Retreat or not, no one had the heart to leave the professor where he had fallen. Schmitty insisted I recommended for the EK2. I obviously hadn't seen the action, but his body was found outside our perimeter, and Erich concurred that it had been Pichler who spotted the enemy infiltrators and saved us all from a deadly ambush. I was able to write his family that he had died a hero's death and had been awarded the Iron Cross. His courage was our victory. There was no pity in us after 3 months of constant action. We left one final calling card for the enemy and departed the Anzio-Nettuno plain for good. The company commander and first sergeant were happy to see us link back up with them. When we all reported to battalion headquarters, they said they were delighted with how my platoon had carried out its mission. I can't say I was.
Am Tag des Heiligen Alexis tobt der Kampf in der von angloamerikanischen
I was given a chewing out, but was permitted to go back up the hill overlooking the highway later that day. The Germans were long gone, and it was so quiet we thought we were dreaming. Jerry had left the grenade caps from his booby traps in plain sight. I could never understand their capacity for inflicting suffering on others. But we also had no idea why the Germans refused to see the writing on the wall, but just kept on fighting a hopeless war right to the bitter end. Nothing about the positions made sense. Loose papers were scattered everywhere, a treasure trove for our intelligence. One of the Krauts had been in such a hurry to escape, he even left one of his shoes behind. I never saw Ben again. I heard his tongue and several teeth had been shot away, and he went home to the States. Our fight on that hill had been my last real action with the force. Rome fell days later, and in August we went to southern France, followed by a hasty disbandment. Neither the Yanks nor the Canadians had any use for specialized units like ours. I went to my hometown regiment in Holland in early 1945. I got mentioned to dispatches for an attack over a Dutch canal in the last days of the war, but I never found the courage to write to Ben to ask about him. There was no doubt we had been part of something special. The force had done great things despite many obstacles. I was proud to have been a part of it, but also glad it was over. I never went to any of the reunions. I couldn't imagine what I would have said to Ben if I had seen him there. I didn't want to remember him as an old, wounded man who had suffered because of me. Sometimes when I felt more forgiving, I told myself there was a reason that grenade never exploded, but mostly I just tried to forget about it all and move on with my life.
I've often been asked why we kept fighting. I had never been able to explain it to anyone that wasn't there. We swore an oath in a time and place that it meant something. Mainly, though, for me, every fallen comrade made the thought of quitting that much more repugnant. Every dead friend was the deepening of a debt we had to pay. Our devotion to duty was not appreciated after the war. Too many terrible things had been done in our name by men who did not know what honor meant. Certainly, the survivors of the hand grenade division had little desire to remember the challenges of those days. It took until 1974 for an Anzio survivor to write a slim history of the division, 30 years after our struggle there. The 65th's long retreat from Rome ended in the Apennines. Erich was killed there in December, and our first sergeant went missing shortly after. I made it to the end, captured in May 1945, trying to get into Austria. My native Estonia fell to the Red Army, leaving me without a country. I ended up in Canada. I heard rumors that Schmitty had made it to the United States, but never saw him again. Really, though, the Schmitty we had known had disappeared that day near Anzio. The friendly comrade who had kept our spirits up even in the toughest fighting was never the same after we lost Pichla, and he isolated himself from us and brooded on the loss for the rest of the war. After the war, every year when the landscape turned green and the weather got warmer, I thought back to the summer of 1944 when, for the first time, our defeat seemed possible to me.